Hello and welcome back to another wartime edition of Laser Focus. This is day 13 of the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, and I am Lazar Berman, your host. Now, what we try to do here on Laser Focus is to give you a deeper understanding of some of the news you might be seeing, whether it's online, whether you're reading it, whether it's on TV. And a lot of the focus, quite naturally, has been on Iran itself, the Iranian military, the regime, some of the dynamics within Iran. And also, of course, on the Gulf states that have been hit by Iran. Some of them even have been hit harder in some ways than Israel. But what I want to do here is to focus a bit to the north, to talk about the northern edge of this conflict, whether that's Turkey, whether that's the Kurds in Iran and in the region, whether that's Azerbaijan, and we'll even go to the Mediterranean and talk about Cyprus as well. Now, all these actors have their own unique relationships with Israel, with Iran, with each other. They are all players in this conflict in a certain way. So what I want you to come away with is a deeper understanding about this whole part of the conflict, whether it's geographical or other themes as well. And to do that, I am here with, I think, Israel's leading expert on all things Turkey and that region, Gallia Lindenstrauss. Now, Gallia, you might have read her writing or seen her on TV or in podcasts. Now, Gallia is a senior research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies. She's co-editor of the Institute's journal, Strategic Assessments, and her work also features regularly in Israeli and in Turkish media. Gallia, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
So before we get to the conversation, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with our discussion. And we're back with Gallia Lindenstrauss. So let's talk about the Kurds at first. This is something that is very close to my heart, close to you as well. I spent time living, working in Iraqi Kurdistan. Just to explain to our viewers who the Kurds are. The Kurds are the largest people, the largest nation in the world that don't have their own states. We're talking about 30 to 40 million. They're spread across Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. The majority or the biggest population is in Turkey. The Iranian population is one, I think, that gets the least coverage usually. In Iraq and Syria, they have their autonomy. In Turkey, there's been groups like the PKK, and it's been kind of a pressing issue for Turkey. But let's talk a bit, who are the Iranian Kurds before the war? What relationship did they have to the regime? And what do they aspire to?
So as you said correctly, there's Kurdish minorities throughout the region. And if we're talking about the Iranian Kurds, we're talking about 10% of the Iranian population. So we're talking between 8 million to 12 million. Nobody's counting them because no country wants to know exactly how many Kurds it has. We're talking about one of the Kurdish populations that has a very strong sense of towards importance of independence. The only case of Kurdish independence was in Iran in 1946 in Mahabad.
So you're saying there was an independent Kurdish state for a year in the Middle East?
Yeah, even less than a year.
Yeah, less than a year.
It was 9 months, but this memory is still a very important element of Kurdish feelings overall in the region, and that's a sense of pride for the Iranian Kurds. We have different factions among the Iranian Kurds, which we also see in other places in the Kurdish population. We have actually the oldest political party of the Kurds, the KDPI, which was since founded in 1945. So again, a very long sense of history. And of course, we have the Kurdish branch of the Iranian branch of the Kurdish underground, the Pajak. And that's the more serious militia, I would say, in Iran.
So they're ideologically aligned with the PKK that we hear about in Turkey and Syria?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Sure. Do you want to say a word about what that ideology has been in the past and whether that's changed recently?
So this is a Marxist organization. It was formed already in the late 1970s. It began to operate militarily in Turkey in the 1980s. It strived originally for independence. Later, it talked about less than that, about autonomy. Today, it only talks about rights in Turkey. But it has different branches in the region. And interestingly, in May 2025, this organization that, again, has been in place since the late 1970s has decided to disband itself, which was a very big announcement and a very big achievement for Turkey. But the local branches, both in Syria and in Iran, are still operating. So there is, we'll get to it later, but there is a fear in Turkey that this might lead to this rollback of the PKK disbanding itself. But anyhow, the Pajak are serious. They're one of the militias that do exist in Iran. I have to say that also during the Shah time, it wasn't good to be Kurd in Iran, and also in Iraq, but
That's
also
true.
in Iran. But of course, it has had also a bad relationship with the regime after the revolution in 1979. And the relationship is so bad that in times these people actually find refuge in northern Iraq. So you'll find these serious Iranian Kurds militia actually finding refuge in Iraqi Kurdistan. And what we heard last week when there was talk about arming of the Iranian Kurds was basically talk about these people. These people who are finding refuge in Iraq, are they now moving inside Iran? That was, I think, the big story. But then we saw Trump do a U-turn about it and said, no, it's better that the Kurds stay out. It's a difficult war anyhow. And I think this was also an indication that this wasn't very seriously thought of, because when you employ the Kurds in the Middle East, you usually do it quietly. You
Right.
don't talk about it so much in the press.
Let me give a little background for our viewers. So early on in the war, so last week in the opening days of the war, there started to be reports in Israeli media. This is one of the fumbles they've had in the war, that this offensive was starting from Iranian Kurds. Now, it was pretty suspicious to me because it didn't seem very well grounded. And then some of the actually leading my colleagues of mine in different outlets started erasing tweets, and it was pretty clear that nothing was really happening. I spoke to some Kurds in Iraq as well. But then, like you said, you heard President Donald Trump saying it would be wonderful if it would happen. And then a couple of days later, he's saying they don't need to do that. We don't need to get them involved. First of all, is there any potential? Is that even a reasonable strategy to rely on the Kurds to be the foot soldiers of Israel in the U.S. and bringing down the regime? Is that even a reasonable, plan to put into place?
Well, the Kurds have been very brave warriors against ISIS. They have played a major role in defeating ISIS, at least on the territorial level, both in Iraq and in Syria. So I think that's one of the reasons people put this issue on paper or discuss it. But of course, it's only one part of the toolkit against Iran. It's only 10% of the population. It's not necessarily that popular among Iranian population that the Kurds are revolting, because for some that might mean that Iran will dissolve into different geographical factions. So it's not that popular in the first place. But again, it's one part of the toolkit. It's for sure one part of the psychological warfare against the Iranian regime. And we did see also bombardments in the areas the Kurds are, which looks like a preparation for them to act. The idea is also that there will be forces that would need to deal with such a Kurdish rebellion. And then these forces would not be in Tehran, and maybe that would enable the population there to revolt. That, I think, is the grand scheme. But again, I would put it in proportion. First of all, as I said, if it's in the air, it's probably not happening the way we perceive it. And besides, again, the Kurds cannot really take over a country as big as Iran, and they don't aspire to do that, of course.
How many fighters are we talking about here?
We're talking about a few thousands. Now, they do have some infrastructure. I mean, there are tunnels, for example, between Iran and Iraq, not as vast as the Hamas tunnels. It's much more difficult also to do tunnels in the mountainous areas the Kurds are. But we are talking about a militia that's been in place for decades and does know how to fight.
So in order for this to happen, you would need the active cooperation of the Iraqi Kurdish elements, at least the PUK, which is the one closer to Iran physically and in its actual relations. Do they have an incentive to do that, or would that put them at a lot of risk, both from Turkey and Iran?
Okay, I think that's a really good question. I think that's one of the problems of trying to initiate an Iranian Kurds rebellion, because you don't have the support of the Iraqi Kurdistan. You mentioned the PUK. That's actually a party which Iran has so much influence in that it's really not going to be anti-Iranian. I can't foresee a scenario that the PUK becomes anti-Iranian, unless the regime falls, of course. And in general, I would say that one of the reasons we saw this hesitation about playing this Kurdish card was the fact that Iran is very harshly responding in Iraqi Kurdistan. Now, Iraqi Kurdistan isn't a recognized state, so we don't see it in all the charts of how many drones, how many missiles it's getting.
Right,
But
it's part of the Iraqi.
It's part of
total,
Iraq.
yeah.
But if you look at it, if you look at the numbers, they got around 200 missiles and drones. So they are quite hit harshly. And it's not only against
the UK. It's all the way in Erbil and more.
It's not only against supposedly the U.S. bases there.
Yep.
It's also against hotels
and airports.
So it's really getting hit hard. And I think that does show that Iran does have leverage on Iraqi Kurds in a way that it will make it very hard for them to assist their brethren in Iran.
So it's no secret, and I've written about this, and I'm sure you've spoken about this as well, that Israel had some deep and effective connections with the Iraqi Kurds, with the Barzani rebellion in the 60s and 70s, really were militarily effective. Israel didn't really achieve its goal of preventing Iraq from deploying in 67 and 73, but it was still a positive relationship. Do you know anything about the relationship that Israel has or has had recently with the Iranian Kurds, and how do those parties and militias see Israel in general?
So there's nothing in the open sources about this relationship between Israel and the Iranian Kurds, so it's only guessing. Of course, their location is very attractive from Israel's point of view. Traditionally, as you said, Israel had good relations with the KDP, with the Barzanis, and had bad relations with the PKK. The PKK cooperated with the PLO in Lebanon.
Yeah, sure.
Israel helped Turkey in the 1990s against the PKK, helped supposedly capture Öcalan, the leader of the PKK, in 1999. So traditionally, Israel had a difficult relationship with the PKK. This slightly changed in recent years because of developments in the Syrian civil war. We see that in northeast Syria, the one that has the most dominance there is the Syrian branch of the PKK. And here we do see that there was some relationship formed between Israel and this Syrian branch of the PKK. And there was also, for example, the foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, discussed with the foreign minister of this autonomy in northeastern Syria, and that was disclosed publicly. So we know this was a beginning of the relationship. But again, I think traditionally Israel has a hard time with this cooperation. We have to remember the PKK is a designated terror organization in many countries. Specifically, I would even say that the Pajak, the Iranian branch of the PKK, is designated as a terror organization in the U.S. So you have to understand
really be careful.
how complicated it is for the U.S. to cooperate with it.
And if I look at a pattern of Kurdish history over the last 100 years, it's that plenty of countries want to use the Kurds when it's convenient. But at the end, there seems to be this pattern of these countries betraying or backing off from their support of the Kurds because larger countries, whether it's Iran, Syria, Turkey, they want to preserve their relationship with them. So I could say that it seems like, and when Israel cut their connection or their active support for the Barzanis in the 70s, it was because Iran and Iraq made a deal, and then Israel had no choice but to back out. Do you think some of that legacy is making the Iranian Kurds more suspicious of U.S. or Israeli promises, and they're less willing to put themselves on the line when, hey, they might be facing a regime that's still intact, ready for revenge, and all of a sudden the U.S. and Israel are gone?
So when you did your introduction, you talked about the 40 million Kurds in the region that don't have a state, And when we try to analyze it historically, why don't they have a state? And there's a few reasons. One is the divisions among the Kurds. We talked about the KDP and the PKK. At some point, it was like water and oil. They didn't mix. Now the relationship is better, but at some point, it was really bad relationship. We can talk about the regional states, the states' repression against the Kurdish minorities, and they were very helpful to each other in repressing the Kurds over the years. Sometimes they used the Kurdish Kurds against one another, but overall, for example, when there was a referendum in northern Iraq about independence in 2017, all the countries did a blockade on the Iraqi Kurdistan. So the regional powers were repressive, and we have the global powers, which none of them really had an interest in Kurdish independence. So again, we see U.S. support of Kurds throughout the years, but it's never that much for independence. Having said that, and the Kurdish sense of betrayal is true, and the famous Kurdish saying, we have no friends but the mountains. Having said that, I think the Kurds can look back and see that they have reached certain achievements. And today, the issue of the Kurds is more open and outspoken. For example, when there was all the story about the Iranian Kurds maybe entering into the fighting, you saw the maps of Kurdistan in the global media, which is something you didn't see in the past. So I think there is now more recognition of Kurdish rights, and I think that will be used with them in the future. But of course, if I'm going back to the issue of the Iranian Kurds and what motivations they have a full stomach against the regime. I mean, they have the motivation to fight against it, but I think they are skeptical also of the West.
So let's move to Turkey. And obviously, this ties in with the Kurdish issue as well. But let's start with on the eve of the war. So it's like February 27th. What was the Turkish relationship with Iran? And where did you think the very problematic relationships with Israel stood at that time?
So Turkey has a very interesting relationship with Iran. On the one hand, they're regional competitors. If you look at Iraq, for example, it's clear there is competition. If you look at Syria, obviously Iran didn't like the overthrow of Assad, and it was a source of contention between these two countries. Having said that, they know how to cooperate. They know how to cooperate very well. Turkey assisted Iran in evading sanctions related to the nuclear issue. It's been more an issue in the past. Now it's less so, but Turkey did assist Iran in evading sanctions. Turkey is a consumer of Iranian natural gas, and that's an important element of the at least economic relationship. And I would say that while Turkey, of course, does not want to see a nuclear Iran, like nobody wants to see, Turkey thought that the way to deal with a nuclear Iran is through diplomacy. And it has invested over the years a lot of effort into diplomacy. It really, really didn't want to see this end in a military action. And this has been useful for the Iranians, who like to drag on the diplomatic the diplomatic talks as a way to gain time and to develop their nuclear program. So that is the context of this relationship. It can't get too warm, it can't get too cold. But this time around, it was very significant that Iran also targeted Turkey. There were 2 missiles that were targeted to Turkey, and they were intercepted by NATO systems, which was very good, and no damage was done. But this was, I think, was some difference than in the past when, and I think the Turks could have assumed they wouldn't be part of this conflict, but Iran, because of the situation, shot all around it. And that, I think, is something that will be remembered also in the future. Although Turkey is still saying we have to end this war as soon as possible. The reason the war broke up is because Israel's provocation. Israel is the one that dragged the U.S. into the war. So from Turkey's perspective, this war has to end as soon as possible.
So let's talk about the Turkish-Israel aspect. Obviously, relations went south again, especially after October 7th. Erdogan could be Israel's biggest critic on the world stage. Open Hamas backer. I've had Turkey's foreign minister. I was in a press thing with him, I think in 2021, when Turkey was trying to rewarm relations. And they said openly, Hamas is not a terrorist organization. And that was a part of their attempt to try to win over Israel. It was very bizarre, but they do not think Hamas is a terrorist organization. But there were reports that there was a slight improvement in relations in the months leading up to this war. Did you notice that? Did you see that there was kind of this attempt to reach some sort of modus vivendi between the two countries and to tamp down on some of the hostility in recent months?
Well, I think we should go back to the 7th of October because in September 2023, for the first time, Erdogan and Netanyahu meet face to face. And that was
in New York at the UN.
In New York in the UN. And that was an indication of something that might have been a little bit better. But then, of course, after October 7th, things went downhill. Overall, we're talking about a crisis in Turkish-Israeli relations for now 15 years, I would say. It starts with the Davos incident in 2009 when Erdogan says to Paris, you know how to kill. And then we have, of course, the Marmara since 2010. And there's been ups and downs, and there's been U.S. efforts to mediate between the sides, and we had periods of normalizations. But overall, if we look at the trend is downhill. And that is definitely a worrying development from Israeli perspective. And I think also from a wider perspective, because we have enough sources of instability. We don't need also the Israeli-Turkish tensions. But unfortunately, even this round, they're unfolding. As I said earlier, from Turkish perspective, Israel dragged the U.S. into this war. Israel is the reason the war broke out currently, not because Trump decided so. And also, you see all sorts of conspiracy theories coming out in Turkey. They try to downplay the missiles that were shot on them. They said at first it was aimed to Cyprus. It wasn't aimed to us. But then when the missile arrived, it was more difficult to claim that. They say, oh, well, maybe, Iranian Central Command is not intact. And this is a
rogue element.
Independent.
Yeah.
And this sophistication of this theory that this is independent factions that are shooting at Turkey is that this is Mossad elements that are shooting at Turkey and they're shooting at Azerbaijan, which was also hit. And again, I think these again, it's of course conspiracy theories, but the fact they exist is an indication of the bad relations. And we have, unfortunately, we have a security dilemma evolving between Israel and Turkey, what each state sees as defensive. And of course, for Israel, this war in Iran is a defensive action. The other country sees as offensive from Turkish perspective. After Israel's finishes with Iran, it might go to, it might target Turkey. Of course, from Israeli perspective, it's completely nonsense. Israel has seen Iran as a threat for many years. So this is a concern. And now I think the U.S. has the ability to be involved. We saw Trump telling Netanyahu, I will make things right with Erdogan for you. Just you have to have reasonable demands. It was in the context of Syria. But I think this going ahead, the U.S. will have to continue being involved in Turkish-Israeli relations.
There was a speech yesterday that Erdogan gave in parliament to his AK party, and there was this very curious line. I reported on it yesterday. He said, "We must absolutely not fall for the Zionist murder networks, killing two birds with one stone game." And then he warned about bloody scenarios that are being attempted to be staged in the region, especially sectarian conflict. What do you think he's talking about there? What's this two birds with one stone that the quote-unquote Zionist murder network is trying to do in Iran?
So Erdogan always tries to emphasize that he's okay with Jews. It's the Zionists that are a problem. That's
people that hate Jews tend to
do that anyway. This week he also said he condemned anti-Semitism as he condemns Islamophobia, but he can also say such a sentence about Zionism. But again, this is very typical Erdogan rhetoric. When I look at it, what are Turkish concerns with regard to the war in Iran? I would say there are a few. One is they're fearful of a refugee flow. Turkey and Iran share a border. And if you look at the Syrian conflict, for example, Turkey got a lot of refugees. Right. So that's one concern. Another concern is this Kurdish issue, which we already discussed. But this possible rollback of the disbanding of the PKK because of the developments in Iran is a big concern. So here I think this is part of what he was referring to in his speech. He also tried to emphasize in the speech that there is no real divide between the Shiite and Sunnis. We're all Muslim, and the fact that there's fighting, the fact that Iran is targeting Sunni states is because there's outside actors that are pushing for such a scenario. And again, here there are references to Israel. Of course, Turkey is worrisome that Israel will strengthen too much out of this war. There is fear of Israel hegemony in the Middle East. This is, I would say, a shared fear also with other Arab states. And of course, Israel has to somehow calm down these fears because, again, from Israel's perspective, this is purely a defensive war because of Iran's military capabilities against it. And of course, also economic repercussions. Turkey suffers from inflation. We're talking about 32% inflation annual rate, at least, according to this February 2026. And this was before, of course, the rise in the energy prices. So this is also a reason why Turkey wants this war over with as soon as possible.
So we're going to take another quick break, and then we'll be back with Gallia Lindenstrauss to talk about Azerbaijan and Cyprus. And we're back. Azerbaijan, an interesting country, a country that is very, very close to Turkey, culturally, linguistically, strategically, but also very close to Israel, and it sits on Iran's northern border. So let's talk about before the war. What was Israel's relationship with Azerbaijan? How was Azerbaijan able to balance between these two rivals in the Middle East, Turkey and Israel? And what is the relationship with Iran?
So if I look at the region before the war, and I think who has existential threats from Iran? So I would say Israel. I would say Bahrain. and I would say also Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is also a Shiite majority country. The largest minority in Iran is Azerbaijan.
Right, bigger than the Kurds.
Yeah, bigger than the Kurds. We're talking, even some people say, a quarter of the population. Now, most of these people are well integrated into the Iranian state. But there is fear that one day these people will revolt and there will be an attempt to make a greater Azerbaijan. So that's
Khamenei was half Azeri, isn't that correct?
so that's from the Iranian perspective, the fear from the Iranian perspective of a greater Azerbaijan. From Azerbaijan perspective, it's a very secular country. They still have the Soviet tradition, and they really emphasize their secularism. And so they're afraid of all this religious propaganda coming from Iran and all this religious infiltration coming from Iran. So that's their basic relationship. Of course, yes, they share a border, and their border actually, because of developments in the Caucasus, the border is no longer actually than previously, because Azerbaijan recaptured Karabakh and the adjunct regions. With regard to Israel-Azerbaijan relations, yes, definitely this is a very strong relationship. From Israel's perspective, definitely one of the important countries Israel has a relationship with. It used to be said that this relationship is like an iceberg, and you don't see most of what is happening. But today, already from 2022, basically, Azerbaijan has now taken this relationship much more to the open. Azerbaijan has now an embassy in Israel. For many years, Israel only had an embassy in Baku, but now there's also an embassy in Israel, and this embassy has kept open throughout the war. Okay, this is very important. Israel is an arms provider to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan was very grateful for these arms and thinks this is one of the reasons its success in Karabakh, because of the Israeli arms. Azerbaijan provides Israel with oil.
30% at least?
Again, these statistics are not out in the open, but the estimate is that around 30%.
And that has to go through Turkey to get here?
Exactly. This is very interesting. This is the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. And this, despite the economic boycott of Turkey on Israel, this oil continues to flow. Again, Turkey is not the initiator of the oil flow, but it does pass through it. And actually, last week there were also reports of the revolutionary guards, people that were arrested inside Azerbaijan, that were supposedly trying to sabotage this pipeline.
Wow.
So that's interesting. And of course, there is the military dimension that, of course, we don't have it out in the open. But you can just look at the map and you can understand why Azerbaijan is important to Israel.
Right. So that would be potentially, again, we're just speculating here, the ability to get people in and out, to talk to agents on the ground, maybe even to put assets there. That's long been speculated. How has Azerbaijan fared in the war? I know that they've been hit by Iran. Can you tell me what's been hit and how they've reacted to that?
So Azerbaijan emphasized that nothing is happening through its territory against Iran. So at least formally, nothing supposedly is happening. And when Khamenei was killed, and Azerbaijan's president went to condole, to send his condolences in the Iranian embassy. But in a very few hours later, there was a drone attack in Nakhchivan. Nakhchivan is an exclave of Azerbaijan. It doesn't have a territorial link to Azerbaijan, but it borders with Iran, Armenia, and Turkey. And it's an airport there was hit, and a school there was hit. And this is because it's an exclave. It's actually in a difficult position, and some of its things that the exclave needs comes through the airport. So this was actually they hit a soft spot of Azerbaijan by hitting Nakhchivan. Azerbaijan, of course, didn't condemn this attack. Decided to withdraw its diplomatic staff from Iran, and from Iranian perspective, they denied the attack ever happened. So again, there's all these conspiracy theories about a false flag operation by Mossad operatives in Iran. But I think looking around, the fact that Iran hit so many countries makes sense that it's also trying to hit Azerbaijan. And again, to make this war a costly thing for many countries around, so to make them exert pressure on the U.S. to stop the war.
Now, have you heard a different tone and different content from Aliyev in the way he's talked about Azeris within Iran? Because I think he's kind of changed the way that he has focused on them since this war has started.
Yeah, I mean, there is no, you cannot see an attempt, a public attempt to try to mobilize the Azeris in Iran against the regime coming from Azerbaijan. This is not something that is being employed publicly. But of course, there are concerns about their safety. There are family links. And it's an issue between the countries. You can't ignore it.
And our fourth country in this kind of northern periphery of the war, Cyprus. Of course, Turkey has a very intense interest in Cyprus. They occupy the northern part of the island. And Cyprus has been hit, or more specifically, the British territory in Cyprus. There's 2 territories centered around bases have been hit. How has Cyprus reacted to being targeted in this war?
So to understand how much of a regional war this war has become, we have to understand that Cyprus as an EU member has been attacked. And we have actually had 2 NATO members that have been attacked. The UK, as you said, these are sovereign bases in Cyprus that have been attacked, and Turkey. So it's a big issue. And Cyprus doesn't really have forces to defend itself. So we saw solidarity by EU members. They sent in several countries, sent in ships, and Greece also sent jets to Cyprus. And we had also a show of solidarity that the French President Macron and the Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis came to show solidarity in Cyprus and had a joint meeting. And we saw, however, a backlash because of all these Western forces coming into the island. The Turks decided that they should deploy also jets on the northern side. They have done that so in the past. It's not a precedent that there are Turkish jets in the northern side, but it doesn't happen often. It hasn't happened in the 21st century, so it doesn't happen that often. And that did also seem to show a sort of escalation. We know that in Cyprus, as you said, Turkey sees itself as a guarantor to the Cypriot Turks, and Greece sees itself as a guarantor to the Greek Cypriots, and hence there is also bilateral tension in this regard. But again, to put things in proportion, Turkey has thousands of forces in northern Cyprus. It has also a drone base in northern Cyprus. So the jets, the F-16s, although it is a show of force and it is a show of, and they also put air defense there. It is a show of intent. But again, the situation in Cyprus has been difficult since the 1960s.
So Israel, Cyprus, and Greece have a strong and growing tripartite alliance. How does Israel fit into this tension over Cyprus, especially now that they've been struck? Are they a player at all right now, or is the focus elsewhere?
So interestingly, the claim is that the one that struck Cyprus is not Iran, but rather Hezbollah. Yep. And we know in the past already, in June 2024, that Hezbollah threatened Cyprus that if it helps Israel, it will be targeted. And in the past, we had Israeli land forces actually train in Cyprus and try to simulate the mountains of Lebanon, interestingly. So there is this element of tensions that is beyond just the Iranian-Israel tensions. Yes, Israel and Cyprus and Greece have formed in the past decade very close relationship. There's a lot of arms acquisition from Israel to Greece and Cyprus. We have defensive systems that are employed in these countries. But it's not a defense pact. We have to say that. There's no expectations that the sides will come to assist the other side in times of war. But definitely, this is part of Israel's backup plans. You know that if you're Israeli abroad, it's always a good idea to come to Athens or Larnaca, because you know that there's more likelihood there will be flights to Israel. And And in this respect, I think this is one of the, when Israel is planning for emergency scenarios, and when it is now in such a big war, Greece and Cyprus are an important backup for it.
So thank you very much. It's a fascinating conversation about the northern periphery of this war. We could have kept talking much longer, but unfortunately we have reached the end of our time. So thank you, Gallia Lindenstrauss of INSS, for coming to talk to me.
Thank you.
And thank you to Gabriella Jacobs behind the cameras for producing, for making this happen, and to Ari Schlacht for all of his editing wizardry. I am Lazar Berman, and we'll be back next week for what I hope is not another wartime edition, but it might be. So we'll be back next week for another edition of Laser Focus. For now, thank you and shalom.